about dinosaur tracks, eggs, and scavenged bone beds. Okay, maybe I will start here. Okay, and so we have our challenges. This, the secular scientists have a lot of challenges too when it comes to dinosaurs. They certainly don't have it made. And our main challenges, which is the only one I'm going to deal with, is how can dinosaur tracks, eggs, and scavenged bone beds, this was the main question that was brought up, scavenged bone beds, occur early in the flood? I mean, this was considered to be an unsolvable problem for flood geology. Well, you know, a lot of problems seem unsolvable without looking into them very deep. But when you look into them deep, you discover, first of all, that a lot of times they're problems for secular scientists also, but you wouldn't know it, mainly because they usually add a secondary hypothesis to paper over the difficulty. You've got to get even beyond that secondary hypothesis and check that out. So they have their problems, and we have ours. And so I'm going to deal with only ours. And let's see. Anyway, these dinosaur tracks have been a real challenge to a lot of people. Here's a quote from the late Glenn Morton on his website. It's not on his website anymore. I guess he took all this stuff off. But anyway, features like these, termite nests, dinosaur tracks, cicada burrows, and channels are not easily explained by young Earth creationists. They don't show their followers this type of data, and they have not explained it. Well, that's 2004. I had an explanation in 1993. And anyway, you can form some of these other things by the same hypothesis. Termite nests, cicada burrows, and channels can be formed in this hypothesis, which I'm going to talking about. And a lot of people have really been challenged. Here's a guy who was getting his degree in geology out in the field, and he said this: by day, quarrying through the layers of rock, we started to come across footprints of terrestrial animals, says Godfrey. You can't imagine a global flood and animals finding ground to make footprints on. That, more than anything, any other experience in my life, really shook me to the core. So this is a major challenge. By the way, the Lord has led me to answer major challenges for the 45 years I've been doing research. Evolution, that's easy. I mean, there's so many major problems in evolution that other people are doing that. I don't focus in on that. But I focus in on the challenges that are difficult for us to explain. And I forgot to tell you that after I find out that it's a challenge to secular scientists, half the time I discover a good possibility within the flood model. So that's where I find. But there's a lot of challenges left to go that I and others have not been able to explain. A lot of it we haven't done the research yet, because and some challenges no one's even touched, but a lot of them I have, and so I have a decent amount of answers for some of these, and this is one that I do. Anyway, here's a typical dinosaur track, three-toed theropod, carnivorous dinosaur track from northeast Wyoming, and believe it or not, that is a large duckbill dinosaur track found on the top of a coal mine in Utah. Yes, indeed, you find dinosaur tracks on the tops of coal mines, Utah, Colorado, Wyoming, Queensland, and the United Kingdom, at least, probably more. This can be explained by this model that I'm going to bring up: dinosaur tracks in coal, on top of coal. Anyway, here's a challenge: dinosaur tracks. There are millions of them now, and they're finding new ones all the time. In fact, I was just up here in Denali National Park in south central Alaska, where they got oodles of dinosaur tracks in that park. And I saw some, got new pictures, and so anyway, here's one on Spitsbergen, island of Spitsbergen. Whoa. Anyway, we have to explain all that. Millions of dinosaur tracks. And by the way, these are live animals that laid eggs, made tracks, and scavenged bones. So they have to be early in the flood, and the sediments are accumulating. And here's a picture of eggs from Mongolia. And here's eggs generally found in these areas you see here, and they find eggs. I don't hear too much about finding new eggs with time. By the way, these slides are old, from the late 1990s, so they have more in more places. But this is a great accumulation of eggs where I live and down south, Wyoming and Colorado, and China, Mongolia, and so forth. Anyway, the question was, a lot of bone beds indicate scavenging. And here is a bone with teeth marks from a carnivorous dinosaur. So yes, we do see these signs in the bone beds. So yes, and here's from the Museum of the Rockies. We have teeth marks on this. I think this is a frill of a triceratops. Teeth marks. And here is a tooth of a T-Rex found in a bone bed in northeast Wyoming. And you know, when you only find, see, they lose their teeth when they chomp on a bone, it a lot of times breaks off. So when you only find the teeth in the bone bed, and by the way, some of these bone beds have thousands of individual dinosaurs all in a small area. But when you find the teeth of carnivorous dinosaurs only and not their skeletons, you know it was scavenged. And so they were scavenged during the flood. So man, these seem like serious problems. I thought so, but when I looked at it closely, I discovered some interesting things. Well, I'm not going to go into this. Okay, I discovered unusual features of bone beds and tracks and eggs. And here's a list of the unusual features. First of all, there's numerous dinosaur graveyards, some of which are huge, like in Montana here, north of here, there's a bone bed of 10,000 duck-billed dinosaurs, all the same species. And I might add that they're all mixed up. They're totally disarticulated, and it looks like they've died one area and they've been re-eroded and redeposited, because sometimes you find the left leg bones of two dinosaurs together, and it should be a left and a right if they died there. But so it indicates that they died in a massive graveyard. Then that graveyard got re-eroded and redeposited. That seems to be common in a lot of graveyards, but some of these, like 10,000, China and Alberta have a lot of huge dinosaur graveyards, and commonly described as being buried in a flood. I mean, the way I have some quotes, which I think I'll have to skip. Often the bones are jumbled together, like I was saying. The bones are a little weathered. Many bones contain just one type of dinosaur. Now, how would that happen? When we have catastrophes today, it'll bury a lot of different animals, say a huge rock slide or a volcanic eruption. When it sends sediments down the mountain, it'll cover a lot. And so a lot of different animals, and it's certainly not the same species of one animal, just a variety. But many of these bone beds contain just one type of dinosaur, or the vast majority of them are one type. That is unusual. That speaks of an unusual catastrophe. Also, the bones of babies and young juveniles are rare. They're found, but they're rare. Now, when you find that you find a catastrophe, a lot of times you'll find just as many young and baby bones as you will adults and older juveniles. So that's rare. Could it be that the babies and young juveniles could not escape the encroaching floodwaters, while the older ones were able to flee for a while? I think that's a good possibility. And here's a jumble of, in New Mexico, a Coliphus graveyard, about 1,000 carnivorous dinosaurs all mixed together. I mean, that's flood. That's Genesis flood, not some local little flood. And a lot of times you find these bones in mud, all broken up. In fact, these white areas here are pieces of bone, indicating catastrophic smashing, breaking up, and huge catastrophes for these dinosaurs. and then ending up in this mudstone here. And here's some, I'll just quote this one. Piled in like logs in a jam. That's how he described bones. So I have a lot of quotes. Unusual features of tracks. Tracks of likely poor swimmers are rare, like Triceratops tracks are rare. Ankylosaurus, you wouldn't think they would swim very good. And I think they're finding more of those now. Tracks of Stegosaurus, which you wouldn't imagine swims very well with those heavy plates and the spike tail. They're fairly rare. So you find, why are tracks of likely poor swimmers rare? You find a lot of duck-billed dinosaur tracks and a lot of theropod, three-toed dinosaur tracks. You'd imagine with their big, thick body, small arms for the theropods, that, man, they can probably float pretty good. So, and that's how the majority of tracks are from them. And practically all tracks, again, are from adults and juveniles, older juveniles, similar to the bones. And interesting, the tracks are practically always straight. I live in Montana, and I'm a elk hunter. And I like to hunt elk in the snow. And when you track them, when they're not spooked, they go all over the place, take sharp corners. But when you spook them, then they run in a straight line or a gently curved line. And the tracks are practically always, if not always, on a single flat bedding plane. I mean, they don't have other bedding planes where they climb up. There's no hills. It's always a single flat bedding planes in sedimentary rocks. And then you have multiple areas where you have multiple track layers. A track layer here, and then maybe 150 feet of sediments, another track layer. And at least in northeast Wyoming, the tracks were almost identical on the two layers, but yet because there was that much sediment in between, they gave it 3 million years. What's the odds of the same types of dinosaurs coming to the same area 3 million years apart? So on all these unusual features, here's a straight track in northeast Wyoming, a theropod track right in here. And here's the plot of that there. They're generally straight or gently curved. Unusual egg features. There's very few actual nests. That's a bowl with vegetation on it, either or. You don't see hardly any bowl structures, maybe about less than a half dozen. And you don't find hardly any evidence of any vegetation like from pollen. So there's very few actual nest structures, but they claim nests. Mainly when they see a bunch of eggs on a flat bedding plane, they call that a nest. But it's not a nest. You see, you got to watch out for some of these descriptions. Got to dig deep. Their eggs are laid on flat bedding planes. Little or no vegetation associated with the eggs. The eggs, and here's the upshot of this. The dinosaur eggs are quite porous, meaning they'll dry out sitting on a flat bedding plane. So it indicates that the dinosaurs did not have time to dig a nest or find vegetation to cover it, but had to lay it quick on a flat bedding plane once they found a flat bedding plane. Well, how do they find flat bedding planes? Well, that gets into what's called the beds hypothesis. Okay, that's one actual nest structure on Egg Mountain, Montana. Anyway, I believe the beds hypothesis can explain it. Beds stands for briefly exposed diluvial sediments. Diluvial is an old name for the flood. So they're briefly exposed, freshly laid sediments. And why? Because sea level or the flood level, as it's rising during the early part of the flood, it's oscillating as it rises. You see, by 5 different mechanisms. And so, and there always seem to be in areas of rapid sedimentation. So, and then you have evidence of a lot of sediment piled on top that was eroded. So, so as you get a local drop, when the floodwater is shallow, it can expose the freshly laid flood sediments. And then a rise will cover it up because you got to preserve all this stuff quickly before it disappears or decays. So that's the bed hypothesis. So here's a block diagram think of these blocks as maybe an area 100 miles in both directions, a big area. But this is just narrowing it down so I can get it on a piece of paper. Anyway, here's the top of the sediments at T1, and it's rapid sedimentation. T2, it's up here. T3, it's up close to the top of the floodwaters. Then you have a local drop, and that exposes the bedding plane. And then dinosaurs floating in the water, swimming, or on higher ground nearby, if there is any, come onto that, lay eggs, scavenge dead dinosaurs, and make tracks. And then you have a local rise that'll cover them up and preserve them. And it can happen more than once, to have multiple layers in an area. Also, for a log mat, there's probably billions of logs floating on the floodwaters. So a local fall would beach these log mats, you see. And then if it rises quickly enough and puts sand over the top of it quickly enough, it'll pin the plants down. And as you pile up sediments, it compresses it, forming coal. And dinosaurs could have walked on that plant matter before it was pinned by the next rise to form the dinosaur tracks in coal, explaining coal and dinosaur tracks. And here's the 5 mechanisms. I'm not going to go into, there's probably more, there might even be more mechanisms, but lunar tides, of course, are pretty obvious. Twice a day going up and down. Some of these, like tectonic uplifts in the area, could last maybe a couple of weeks being exposed. I mean, so there's different spatial and temporal scales in all of this. And here's a little quickie, a block diagram again. Think of freshly laid sediments, do a drop, and they lay eggs, make tracks, and there's dead dinosaurs around. They get beached. And then a local rise. It's muddy water, by the way, so it's going to cover it all up. And this is just one possibility. In this case, it didn't drive those dinosaurs off. So that another drop, they can do it again. In other cases, it would rise and you could put 150, 200, 300 feet of sediment and then fall again. So you had a lot of variability and a lot of possibilities to explain features on multiple tracks. And by the way, you can explain dissociated features. I think I would get into this. Yeah, you can actually have true mud cracks. It only takes maybe less than 24 hours to form a mud crack. You can have raindrop imprints, which you do have. Bird tracks, there's lots of bird tracks with the dinosaur tracks. Coprolites, paleosols, burrows, social insect nests. All these can be explained with the beds model, which a lot of these are considered big problems especially for the early flood. And these are mud cracks. I think I'm going to end it there and go to the questions. This is a picture of mud cracks in a dinosaur quarry in Utah.
I appreciate that, Mike. I really appreciate how informative your answers are. And as I said before, I always love the slides. So